Welcome back to Core Anesthesia. Whether you are a student prepping for tests and boards or a CRNA here to earn CEUs, we are glad you've joined us. For more about us, make sure to check us out on Instagram at Core Anesthesia and online at coreanesthesia.com.
Welcome back to Core Anesthesia. I'm Cole here with Tanner, and we're coming off of Nashville, the ANA conference 2026. It was an amazing time. We always feel like we come off these conferences with just excitement and energy, just moving forward. And we have a great new fresh set of ideas of what we're going to add to our product. So we're really excited to roll those out over the next few months. Stay tuned for that. But today we really noticed that while we were at the conference, there were a lot of ICU nurses that were coming up to us, which I think is amazing, that there are more and more ICU nurses coming to the annual conference, seeing what our profession is all about, and just that excitement for joining to that profession. And so today we wanted to focus a whole episode designated to our listeners who might still be in the ICU, or maybe you just got accepted into anesthesia school and you're about ready to start school. Just you're earlier on in the journey. A lot of our episodes are more geared to those that are in school or even have already graduated. And so we wanted to do an actual episode that's focused primarily in that realm of, okay, I'm pre-anesthesia school. I'm in the ICU. I'm preparing for the next steps to even get into school, or maybe I just got accepted and I'm waiting to actually start my first day of my program. So in a moment here, I'll have Tanner introduce our guest speaker. We're really excited to talk about CCRN prep and getting and obtaining your CCRN certification, how that's going to help better your chances of getting into anesthesia school. We know that not every school requires this, but most do. And so we're really excited to just talk about that area of things. How can you set yourself up for more success to continue your journey of becoming a nurse anesthetist?
Yeah, so it's my privilege to introduce Rebecca Coulter, and I feel so formal introducing you this way because we've become such good friends. And if you guys see a lot of like the front-facing stuff, you see Cole and I, and you don't see the whole team that is behind Core Anesthesia. And so it's fun when we get to do a podcast like this and bring one of our team members on here to talk about her product. And so Rebecca Coulter, she is an ICU nurse. She started her career at Johns Hopkins and then did some travel nursing and now works with Archer Review and does CCRN prep. This course has been incredibly successful. And so it's been really, really fun to watch how that's grown and all the resources that she has available. So today we felt like, this has been several years since Cole and I went through it. Rebecca, she's in it every single day, helping people as they're preparing. And also she's obviously created the curriculum to study for it. And so we thought no better person to have on and talk about all the things related to the CCRN prep. So Rebecca, it's awesome to have you on.
Thanks for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
I was thinking maybe we could just get started and talk about maybe just your story of starting in the ICU. If I remember correctly, you started right out of school, which I did too. And that was like, yeah, that was an experience. And so maybe you could just start there and then we'll get into some more things as we move along.
Yeah, totally. I love to tell this story. It was a very, pivotal part of my life and my career starting in the ICU. I think I knew in school I always wanted to do critical care, so I was willing to really do whatever it took to make sure that I got there as fast as I could. So I went to school in North Carolina, moved to Baltimore because that's where I got a new grad ICU job, which were kind of hard to come by at the time. So I had to move, which was totally fine, and started in the cardiovascular surgical ICU at Johns Hopkins there in Baltimore. And wow, that learning curve was way steeper than I think I ever could have imagined.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. And when I started travel nursing, I kind of realized, there's a lot of different ways that units go about orienting new ICU nurses. And I realized that where I happened to start was a unique place in the sense that in that first 6-month orientation, they wanted you trained on every single device. There were no second orientations to get trained to ECMO once you had a year of experience or any of that. It was all right there in the beginning, which I think was good for their staffing. Every single one of their nurses was trained on every single device, and that makes it easy to staff a unit. So I totally understand, but it was a difficult time. And when I look back at that time, I just think about the word fear. I was so fearful all the time, fearful of making my own mistakes, but then also very fearful of looking really dumb. It was such a high pressure unit that, everyone's kind of always watching, and you've got that fear of, well, I want my coworkers to be able to trust me, and they're actively watching me learn things for the first time and messing things up for the first time. And it was the kind of the first time in my life that I had experienced this, going into a unit where actually I think I had an okay knowledge base, but I couldn't bridge that to practice. I had this really terrible time of when something would actually emergently happen with my patient, being able to take action. I felt paralyzed in fear of messing up or doing the wrong thing. And I had never experienced that before. That had never been my response to a stressful situation, was being paralyzed and not being able to do anything at all. I didn't even recognize myself as I was going through that orientation.
I feel like I can like totally relate to that, because I remember when I started in the ICU, it was like, I mean, you go through nursing school and obviously there's a ton of information that you learn, but your stint in the ICU, at least it was for me, it's not all that long while you're, on different clinical rotations. And so all the things that you're learning, it feels like you're learning an entire new school in the course of an orientation span of time. And then you have people that are really, really, quality nurses, experts at what they're doing. And behind every action you're taking, you're like, if I mess up, like they're going to think I'm just, one, like I'm gonna potentially cause harm to the patient. And then two, like people are going to think I don't belong here. Or I don't have any idea what I'm doing. And you're trying to perform while you're also trying to learn so much material. I mean, it's so much. And I remember like being there, my first time I had a patient that was coding, and I'm like, I know what to do. But and literally what I was supposed to do in that situation was do an ABG, and I'm holding the patient's arm and I'm pointing the needle the wrong direction. Like I'm pointing it like towards their palm. And I'm like, I remember the doc just being like, hey, why don't you flip that around? I was like, see, this is like, this is awful. And never would I've probably done that before, but I was totally stressed out of my mind. And yeah, I can resonate with that feeling for sure.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head too when you talked about just the idea of you have fear for two reasons: fear of harming the patient, but also fear of just you're new, you're trying to get used to this setting, you don't want your colleagues to look down upon you. A reputation standpoint plays a big role into it, which I think goes into imposter syndrome too. I mean, we talked about imposter syndrome, an episode or two ago, Tanner? It doesn't just stop in the ICU. It goes all the way through. At least I'm still waiting for it to stop, and it hasn't stopped yet.
No, for sure.
But yeah, the fear level though, and I think when you're paralyzed in those moments of emergencies where, like, when you're planning about what you would do if things were to happen, you can rationalize and say, okay, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z when this happens. And the moment you have that emotional, like your heart starts to race, and it's different when it's your patient versus when you're walking in to help somebody else's emergency. Like you can think so much clearer when it's somebody else's, but when it's yours, which tells me it's not just a fear of knowing what to do in a medical emergency to help a patient. There's an emotional attachment that I have had with that patient, but also a reputation side of things with this is my patient. Like, how does this look for everybody else? There's more that plays into it, right? And I keep waiting for that to go away. Like I keep striving to get better at that. But even now that I'm an anesthetist, like when things start to happen, I have that initial response of my heart rate jumps, and that fear of, okay, I'm like almost paralyzed. Like, what do I do? And that time span gets shorter and shorter. Like I'm training myself to snap out of that emotional attachment and medically treat the patient, critically think. But it's not just in the ICU. But I remember those moments fresh out of school. They were real, and they were terrifying.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're totally right. I mean, I've now been in the ICU for years, and I still have I have that exact same experience of, okay, I'm feeling something, but like now you're right. Like that time to then taking an action is much shorter. Whereas before, getting to that first action as a new grad was so tough. And I remember being so concerned that my preceptors weren't even going to like let me off orientation on that unit. 50% of the orientees on that unit went to the step down anyway, because it wasn't a fit. So that was like a real reality that I was like, no, I want to work here so badly.
I assume you're a very high achiever, and like, I don't know if you played sports or like obviously you did great in school and went straight into the ICU. Like in order to have that type of personality or that build, like I assume you're used to being a high achiever. I think most ICU nurses are. So I think it's a unique experience when you're used to being like the best at things to then go into an orientation and all of a sudden you're like very clearly not the best. And then it feels like I think that's a tough spot to be in. Like you're not used to being there. You're used to like being the one that gets the good grades. You're used to being the one that gets good evals on clinicals. You're used to being that person. And then when you go in and you are for sure probably the last person on the unit that someone's going to go to, it's an uncomfortable position. And I feel like we want like how we're wired, everything in our body is like, I need to get out of this situation. Like I need to be better. And then every time a stressful situation happens, you feel like you're being judged, or this is like the time that you're being critiqued. And yeah, I think probably some of our wiring of being high achievers plays into some of that.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It was so humbling, so humbling. And I look back at it now and I'm like thankful, not even just like career wise for that experience, but also just personally, like having those humbling experiences that make you realize like, and I not that I feel like I entered it thinking like, oh, I'm just like the best thing that's ever graced this earth.
For sure.
Just that knowledge of like, there's always someone that's doing it better than you. And that still holds true, you know? And that was really, really good for me to kind of have to embrace that discomfort and embrace the idea that not everyone was going to think I was super smart or super capable, and try to overcome that and still get better at this job and not let that completely stifle me. And yeah, and what I did notice during that process too, man, I'm looking around at this unit of nurses that were absolutely incredible. And I started to kind of put the pieces together that having a really good like knowledge base, being really, really good at your job is virtually useless if you're not approachable. It's really good for that nurse and that patient, but it's not helpful to anybody else around you. And so I started kind of thinking through that when I was a new grad and starting to kind of get my stuff together and be able to do something, thinking, if I ever do figure this out, I want to be able to be like, keep the humility that I have learned from this process and be as approachable as possible, while also being hopefully really successful and like just a good nurse. All I wanted was just to be a good nurse. And I think during my new grad orientation, I was worried that I wasn't, which is a hard thing to wrestle with. But that as I started to grow and understand things a little bit more, be able to act in those situations, gain some trust on that unit that I thought I would never be able to be trusted on from my orientation, that was really my goal. And that does kind of lead into the CCRN and why I am personally so passionate about that particular step in an ICU nurse's career, whether they're going to nurse anesthesia school and that's their main motivation for becoming certified as it's such a requirement, or just wanting to kind of have a seal of their knowledge be established, prove their knowledge base. Because I waited quite a while, like 3 to 4 years before I took my CCRN, because I had no motivation to do it. And my hospital was not paying any extra to be certified at the time, the hospitals I was working at. And I didn't know, going back to school wise, if I was interested in that yet or not. So I just thought, well, what's the point? Why would I do that? But then I did end up getting a job that I needed to be certified for. So I went through the process and got certified. And that preparation of preparing for that exam bridged the gap on so many concepts that even years into my ICU career, after I'd experienced multiple units of, really big hospitals, high acuity, all these experiences, I'm preparing for this test. And I'm like, wow, how have they let me on the unit? I didn't know.
Exactly.
I hear that from everybody. Everybody that takes a CCRN comes back later and they're like, I truly don't know how I was a successful ICU nurse up to this point. Like I have so many dots connected. Everybody says the dots connect for them when they take this exam.
I think that was the first time I thought, well, I shouldn't say the first time, maybe. I feel like it was the first time for me that like learning was fun, because before it was always like, I just need to learn this for a test. And obviously like in deep down, you're like, of course I need to know this for my future career or whatever. But really you're so focused on the test. But for me, this was the first time that like I'd been in the ICU for some time, and then I'm learning these things and I'm like, yeah, I saw that yesterday. Oh, that's why we did that. Oh, and it just was kind of like a domino effect. And before I was such an if-then ICU nurse where I was like, okay, blood pressure is low. If this, then this, and I get this order and I hang this drip and I make sure the line is primed and and I was just like so task oriented. And then when I took the CCRN, like I felt like it was a whole nother dimension to understanding. And I honestly, prepping for the CCRN was really fun for me because I felt like it was just, yeah, you're doing that stuff every day, but understanding the why behind the things was really valuable. I mean, it was enjoyable.
Yeah, absolutely. That was exactly my experience. And it just made me think, wow, there's like something to this. There's something to nurses becoming certified and whatever their specialty is. I just only ever worked in ICU, so that's obviously the one that I care about. But that is such a critical piece to being like a good ICU nurse, is getting out of that task-oriented mindset that we are so pushed into in the beginning. I mean, I remember from that first unit I worked on, which I realized this is like not normal across units and not across the country, but we would take a fresh post-op, open heart post-op and still have another patient, which normally that's like a one-to-one situation. But we would have to balance that sometimes. And that was absolutely the hardest. That was the hardest patient situation.
I was just saying that's why I love anesthesia now, is because I'm always a one-to-one. Like I hated going back and forth and constantly worrying what was happening to my other patient. When you're
Yes.
dealing with a really critically ill patient over here, and you just can't be both places at once. So I can't imagine how you did that.
Yeah, someone coming out of like recovering a heart and having it's insane.
I remember thinking like, oh man, my other guy hasn't taken his third walk today. Like I've got to figure out how I'm going to walk this other patient.
Oh man, Rebecca, I would have been immediately on the step down unit during orientation. They would have had one look at me and they been like, yeah, this guy's not able to recover a heart and walk his patients. He's out of here.
Trust me, I remember when I got to that stage of the orientation, it was like the last 2 months of that 6-month orientation. But I had this like moment where I realized like the only way I was going to get through it was like God had to take control of me. Like there was not much I could like study at home and come into work and be able to handle that situation better. There was like nothing I could do to figure that out. And that in addition to other situations that we're all familiar with. And I would go into work every single day, like praying, like, God, you're going to have to be my mind. You're going to have to be my hands and my feet. Like, you're just going to have to do everything because I can't do this. And I mean, I do consider like me coming off orientation on that unit personally as like a miracle, because there was like no reason that I should have been able to do it.
I feel like that speaks so much into what you said earlier about the approachability. Is I think that's something Cole and I really try to drive home here on Core, is like we did anesthesia school and it was awful. It was tough. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life. And to not pretend like it wasn't. And like you went through that orientation and that was such a grueling experience, and you don't have to get to the other side of it and just be like, yeah, I did it. You can do it too. Like now we can, as we have those experiences, now the approachability aspect comes in where it's like, okay, this is what would have been really helpful for me. And now I can pass that on to somebody else, or this is what would have been helpful for you. So that's why, I mean, I think it shows through with your course for the prepping for the CCRN, is just like, you know, the steps that it took, and then you're so in tune and in touch with, okay, how do we walk through each of those things so that we're prepared? And I think, you know, some people don't have the perspective, like you go through it and it's gone and done and other people can figure their way out. But you've always had this idea of like, how can I help other people through the journey? So, I mean, your story speaks to that for sure.
Yeah, definitely a goal for sure to just show people that there's like a million different ways to get this job done. There's a million different ways to get into anesthesia school, to get into the ICU, to be successful in the ICU. And you can start from a lot of different places and still end up there. So yeah, with the CCRN course, I really enjoyed, like, as I was going through my career, I started precepting there at Hopkins before I started travel nursing. And once I precepted my first new grad, I was like, this is so fun. I don't know if she found it to be as fun as I thought it was. I'm sure that she had a similar experience to me on my orientation, but I loved seeing those initial stages of gaps being bridged for new grads and new to ICU nurses, and exposing, like, really focusing on the why we do certain interventions. Why do we use epinephrine for this patient, but we use norepinephrine for this patient? Like, working through why we use different medications, use different interventions. And that really led into when creating the CCRN course. How much can I deliver that why so that nobody ever has to memorize anything? That was kind of my goal, was if we can understand normal physiology, then when we start to talk about pathophysiology, we can grasp it because we know what it's supposed to look like normal. And then when you understand the pathophysiology, you should never have to memorize signs and symptoms or even interventions, because it just should theoretically make sense. If you understand the normal really, really well, then the abnormal, like, you have a chance at it just kind of clicking. And that all kind of started as I started precepting these new nurses, and totally tried to bring that into that CCRN course, that people could leave feeling like, one, they could be successful on their exam, but two, go into work the next day and have a really confident conversation with a provider about why, if they needed to ask a question about why we're doing one thing versus another, they could have a level of confidence going into that conversation because they had some sort of skin in the game with their preparation.
That makes such a huge difference. I remember one specific conversation when I was like pretty new on the ICU, and I suggested something. I like, there was an issue with the patient. I suggested something, and the doc was like, just frankly very blunt about, well, that was like a really dumb suggestion because X, Y, or Z. And I was like, oh, okay, I didn't know that. But I remember that was so stuck in my mind for some time after that, where I would see a problem, I'd want to suggest something, but I didn't want to have that conversation again. And so I was more timid with, elevating concerns or elevating things because I didn't have the confidence. And so, like you just said, giving the tools to, have the skin in the game for the plan of care, and then having the tools to be able to actually have confidence and talk through those concepts, like, that was massive for me. And I feel like CCRN was a huge part of that. That comes with experience too, but that's invaluable if you can give that tool to somebody.
Yeah. And for me, I was in a teaching facility. So we had residents every month that were coming through. And I really enjoyed, actually, every day they would do their morning and then their afternoon rounds. And they would all, as a group, while each like team of residents would have, 3 or 4 patients on the unit, and there'd be several teams of residents taking up everything. They would all get in a big huddle, and they would go down with their, I don't know if your facilities are like this. They'd have their computer on wheels on the little carts, and they would, go through the ICU, and they'd all stop outside one door in a big semicircle, and the attending would be there. They'd all discuss everything about the patient. I loved those times because I would always try to be involved in that conversation, because that honestly is when I started to really connect dots as well on top of the CCRN, was starting to learn the more the concepts of why things are this way versus the other, rather than, to your point, Rebecca, than just memorization. Like, I mean, Tanner and I try to push that so much on all of our episodes and our content, is don't memorize simply to memorize. There are things that you have to decide, okay, if I just can't wrap my head around this, I just can't figure out a way to rationalize this, I got to add it to my memorization bucket. But most things, you can make a concept map in your head and figure it out. And if you understand this map and this picture, it doesn't take much brain power to add one little wing to that map you've already created. It's just an extra little piece. But yeah, I think for me, that what you said earlier really helped too, is when you started precepting, was it like mind-boggling just how far you've come at that point? Because you go from this scared new ICU nurse fresh out of school. I mean, that's what both Tanner and I were. We went right out of school to ICU. And then first patient I precepted, I was like, dang, I didn't realize how much I actually have learned and grown in the last X amount of months. And at least at our facility, it's like 6-month turnaround, you're precepting the next person, just because ICU is such a fast turnover rate. But before you know it, you look around and you're one of the OG people on the floor. You're like one of the old people, right? But yeah, for me, it was seeing new faces and precepting made me realize just how much and how far I'd grown in that time span.
I have to go back and touch on one thing. When you said the residents bring their carts on wheels around, did you guys call them cows?
Yes.
Yes, I forgot about that. Yeah.
Because I had never heard that, so I was travel nursing, and I get to California, and they're like, grab the cow, and I was like, oh, I am not cut out for this. What? Like, I do not work with bovine. This is give me a human patient. And they're like, no, you dummy, that's the cart on wheels. I just had never heard that until I was traveling.
The first place I worked, I think it was like I was a nurse aide in nursing school. I think this was where this happened. And we would call them cows. And then I guess there was some story that happened where a patient thought they were talking about her. Like, they heard somebody in the hallway say, get that cow over there. And so then
Oh,
then they
my
made this
goodness.
whole
oh,
change where you had to call it a WOW, a workspace on wheels.
oh, okay. Yes.
And
Love that.
I don't know if it would ever really stuck, but
Could you imagine being, that is a horrible experience for that patient, like for sure. Could you imagine in the whole time just being convinced that they're talking? That's devastating.
it
And
is.
then,
It really
yeah,
I can't
we
imagine.
should have known better. I mean, let's not go for cows. That's the wows. Okay. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt this incredibly informative podcast to bring up the cows, but I just had to know.
I think that's very important.
All right, back on track. I think Cole, were you asking something about, you were asking about the like precepting and the confidence building there?
Yeah, no, I was just kind of adding on Rebecca's statement on that, unless you had something to add, Rebecca.
No, and other than I absolutely agree. And I remember my first orientee, I'll never forget her. She was so sweet and we like looked a lot like each other, which was always so, I don't know, it was just kind of funny. And I remember thinking like, you're so smart. Like this girl, she was so smart but still had all the same struggles that I did. Like being able to actually take the actions. Our struggles in the orientation process were very, very similar in that way. And that just to like add to that point that if you are finding yourself to not be as successful as you wanted to be in whatever it is that you're doing, being a new ICU nurse, starting nurse anesthesia school, whatever it is, it doesn't take away from those things that you still have. Like we're smart, like you're still smart, even if you're struggling to put the pieces all together. It doesn't now mean that you're dumb. And I remember like trying to drive that home to her because I could tell like that's what she was telling herself. Like,
Yeah.
I'm just dumb. Like I can't put this together. And that's just not what it is. Like these experiences, these things that you're pushing yourself through, especially anesthesia school, the learning curve that is, oh my goodness, it's not taking away what like these qualities that you have about yourself or the things that you've established in yourself. It's just a new experience.
It's so good. There's something we talk about a lot with the isolation of negative self-talk in anesthesia school, where if you don't have that outside voice, like it's amazing that you were that outside voice for that person, but a lot of times you don't have that outside voice. And then that internal narrative is, yeah, I'm so dumb. Oh, I should have done this better. I'm sure other people have done this better when they went through the same thing. And that spiral is so easy to get into. And in the OR, like there's nobody else, there's no other, colleagues they're watching you and they're like, oh, it's okay. I would have done probably the same thing, or like you're just by yourself. So you can easily spiral. And I think when you're in, a preceptee situation where you don't necessarily always feel like you have resources to go talk to somebody, you can easily do that same thing where you are spiraling. So it just speaks to like your mentorship qualities to be able to recognize that and then to be able to voice that to them, because that can be just as big of a barrier as like a knowledge gap is just getting in your own way and in your own head on things that you don't need to spend any energy and time there. So, I mean, that's pretty special. I think one of the things that we wanted to talk about here for people that are going through the CCRN process, like, I mean, the product that you've built has been insanely successful and people are using it to pass their CCRN and it's very engaging, but can you give them like a broad view? So we've talked a little bit about your like personality and with mentorship and your method for bringing people along, but what does that look like actually for the CCRN course? And we have it linked on our website now, so you can go to our ICU resources and click there and you can get right to the modules. But I guess what does that look like from a high arching view? And then we can actually get into some of what the prep course looks like.
Sure. Yeah. So what we wanted to provide was not too extensive. Like we didn't want to make a 20 to 30 hour course for CCRN. We wanted it to be as like quick and to the point and concise as possible while still giving you like the valuable information. So it ended up being about 13 hours of lecture material, all broken down into small bite-sized videos that are really attached to one topic at a time. So you can go through and select, I just want to learn about pulmonary artery catheters today. And that's a 15 to 20 minute video, all within a larger cardiac module if you wanted to watch the long form. But just be able to allow somebody who's coming in, I mean, when we talk about ICU nurses, that is a wide variety of experience. With big medical centers, there can be 10 different specialized ICUs. So somebody can come into preparing for their CCRN with only neuro experience, and someone like me at the beginning of my career, come in with only cardiac experience and be absolutely horrible at anything neuro-related. I now work in a more general ICU, thank goodness, because I needed to broaden my experience. But, you enter that preparation stage in very different places. So one person might not need to watch a lot of content on anything neuro-related, and another person might need to focus all their time there. So we made it very easy to go through and just see what topics do you care to explore on, or do you want to watch the whole course? And then it's easy to do that too. The way that, and I kind of talked about it before, the way that I really wanted to make sure that information was presented was that normal was always established. So for every single module, we start with really pretty basic, quick run through of anatomy and physiology to make sure that our baselines are all the same before we start getting into any sort of pathophysiology and interventions. And if you take the course, you'll hear me repeat that all the time. I'm like, oh, here we are again. We're starting with anatomy and physiology. It's probably a review for you, but we have to know that this is where we're starting, just to enable for as many gaps to be bridged as possible. And then there are a good amount of like personal stories, personal situations mixed in there to help. Like you were saying, like you would be preparing for the CCRN and be like, I saw this yesterday. I think that's one of the most unique parts of the CCRN. It is one of the most applicable curriculums or test plans out there. I think nobody prepares for their CCRN and be like, oh, that was a waste of time. I've never seen any of this stuff before. It's super applicable to your work. And I wanted to make sure those connections were drawn within the course. So that's a little bit of a high level breakdown of what the modules actually look like. And then we have a question bank as well, practice question bank.
So I remember when I was studying for my CCRN, it was, you're busy working in the ICU and you've got life going on, all that kind of stuff. Will it track your progress, or if like you want to jump back in on a certain part, or if you're taking different questions, like how does all that tracking, or what kind of accessibility do you need to have to be able to sit down and actually get through things?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So it will track everything, every question that you've taken, and wherever you're at in a module video, you can easily resume right back where you were. So when you go in for the Q bank side of things, it's over 1,000 questions in that question bank, and you can select, I just want to take cardiac today. I just want to look at neuro, build me a 45 question practice test on just these concepts, or give me, give everything. So there's a lot of customizing there that you're able to do. Obviously, there's customization within the course itself, picking what topics you want to go through and in what order, or you can do it all in the order that it's provided. And all that tracking is built in. Once you finish 80% of the course material, you can take a quick post-test and evaluation and get a CE certificate as well for 13.75 hours. So that's another incentive, so to speak, if you're trying to get through more of the course. We have contact hours with that as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. I feel like we've just been hearing like nothing but good reviews on it. And for me, I feel so old saying this, but I did it on like pen and paper. Like I had like a review book where I was going through and like filling in multiple choice and stuff.
Sure.
And I feel like having the like ability to, start, stop, fit it into your schedule whenever you can, and then like customize those testing plans on topics that mean the most to you. Yeah, it's awesome. What you've created is incredible.
And I can't take any credit for this, but our tech team, it's all accessible on a mobile app as well, which I should have emphasized.
Yeah.
So as soon as you have an account, you can make an account either on the mobile app or online, but it all communicates with each other. So you're able to take practice questions wherever you go. And all the lecture videos are on there as well. But
That's amazing. I wish I would have had that resource when I was studying for it. I really, really do. I wasn't as old as Tanner. I didn't do things on pen and paper, but I had some videos that I watched, and that was about it. Well, I guess to start to wrap things up. So for those that are taking their CCRN or planning to take their CCRN, my guess is a large number of you, especially if you're listening to this episode, are wanting to go to CRNA school, wanting to become a nurse anesthetist. So I guess at this point, me looking back, like Tanner, what are some things that you wish you would have known at the time you were doing your CCRN, looking ahead towards CRNA school? Like how do you bridge that a little bit better? Like things you would have done a little bit differently, or things you would have focused a bit more on when you were studying, just anything from that nature, anything you would change or do differently?
It's not necessarily something I would have done differently, but it's something I'm glad I did. I took my CCRN like very shortly before I interviewed. And doing the CCRN prep was fantastic for interviews. Like that was, you're already in the material, you're already understanding. This is a lot of what interview questions are about, like understanding disease processes, understanding why you're doing certain interventions. And so the fact that that was so fresh for me, I feel like was a really, really great prep for the interview process. And so that would be one of my suggestions is if you've already, maybe taken the CCRN and you don't have an interview for some time, I would go through material again, use those practice questions, use the rationales, use the videos to go through understanding different, wedge pressures or like whatever you want to talk about, different waveforms. You can be very well versed in talking about that for the interviews, and I think that'll serve you well. And then two, I would like if you're on the fence about doing the CCRN, I hope what we've said today will convince you because it connected just so many dots. And like you guys said, that's what we hear from everybody that's taken it. And it's something that you're actually using every single day and understanding the why behind it. And the course that you've created, Rebecca, is, I think, just an incredible resource for people to go wherever they're at in their journey. Like you said, if you're in, neuro or if, I hated neuro. Whenever I get floated to neuro, I was like, what am I doing here? It would be like some weird thing on the monitor and they'd be like, oh, it's just a neuro thing. And I'm like, no, what? Because in cardiac, there's a reason for why I stage. And then in there, it's just like, don't worry about it. That's just a neuro symptom. I'm like, oh, okay. But yeah, like you said, like no matter where you're from in the ICU, I feel like you have so many different resources and understanding the normal, understanding all the things to help you, one, pass the CCRN, but then two, just go back and have more confidence in the ICU. So that'd be my two things. Use it to prep for interviews, and then two, if you're on the fence, just get off the fence and do it. You're going to be so thankful you did.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
For that.
Yeah. You kind of stole what I was going to say for that. It was, I took the CCRN earlier on, but I went back and redid the course that I had at the time prior to taking interviews, and that helped me immensely. So that was going to be my feedback was for anybody that has already taken it a while ago, there's no harm in redoing a course. It's actually going to be very, very beneficial, even though you're not taking a test necessarily on it after going through it. So even if you're somebody listening, you've already done the CCRN, I would highly recommend you to still look at Rebecca's product, like especially with all the test questions and things that can come with it, the Q banks. It just keeps you fresh, but it also keeps you better prepared as you enter into the application period for CRNA school. But secondly, for me, I just feel like anesthesia school wasn't that different than ICU in terms of if you understand the basic principles of why you choose certain vasopressors and how you titrate those and how you titrate different sedation medications and how you manage vent settings, things of that nature, which you learn the why of that with the CCRN. So just finding a really good prep course that really explains the concepts and not memorization is going to pay you so much more forward going into anesthesia school. So I just want to speak again to that. Like Rebecca's created such a good product that does that. So even if you've already taken your CCRN, I just highly recommend that even if you've gotten accepted to anesthesia school already and you're just waiting a few months to start school, review her course because it's just gonna tee you up for success as you enter into your first few months in the anesthesia community.
So I already mentioned, if you go on coreanesthesia.com, you can click on ICU resources and you can see the course there. Rebecca, can you tell us how else users can find the material?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So the URL to get you directly there would be nurses.archerreview.com/CCRN. We'll take you right to that course. And we also do webinars. I just love teaching. So it's like a way that I can, since the course is an on-demand format, a couple times a month we'll do live lectures for free as well, just to go through practice questions together or hit some tough concepts. And those have been super, super fun. So yeah, definitely check it out.
Yeah, I love it. I know a lot of you have used Archer Review in the past for NCLEX prep, and so you know how great of a product it is. And so Rachel's created something really special there. And so make sure you go check it out. We'll have it tagged on our show notes. Again, you can find it on our page, or if you go to nurses.archerreview.com, you can see it there as well. And yeah, Rebecca, thanks for being on. It's been so fun. Again, I said this at the beginning, but like people just see Cole and Tanner and they have no idea all the things that go behind the scenes. And so it's really fun to have you on. We're grateful to have you on. This has been a lot of fun.
Thanks, Tanner. Thanks, Cole. Y'all are a dream to work with. That's for sure. There's a reason that you're so well loved, which I loved seeing at the conference, by the way. That was the coolest thing ever.
We were so nervous because we had told you that it gets busy. And then Cole and you had a dream, didn't you, Cole?
Oh yeah, I had a dream like 2 nights before the conference. I'm like we had told Rebecca, we're like, it's just nuts at these conferences. Everybody wants to come up and just like our booth's just packed the entire time. And then I had this dream that like it was crickets. And
I'm so nervous.
Smoking here, but this is
Yeah.
like not what you said it was gonna be. But thankfully to all of you, you showed up great. It was a great turnout. We had an awesome event this year. So thanks again, Rebecca, for coming there with us and then also coming on here. Again, we really just hope this is beneficial to all of you. Again, we know this is more directed to those that are in the ICU and not those that are in anesthesia school. But if you're listening, you're in the ICU, regardless if you've taken the CCRN or not, we think her product is so beneficial. It's going to help you on your journey to becoming a nurse anesthetist.